New generation of diverse leaders is coming up in New Hampshire politics, a notable development given the Granite State's demographic makeup and the renewed national attention on the issue of racial justice. This morning, we welcome to Close Up Ryan Terrell from the State Board of Education and Joanna Kelly, the Assistant Mayor of Portsmouth. Thank you both for connecting. And since you both gained those titles since we last had you on the program, congratulations.
Thank you.
So there's so much we could talk about, but I want to start with what you're hearing in your positions of leadership at the state and local level. When Granite Staters are reaching out to you to solve problems or talk, what are they talking about? And then what do you see as some of the top issues? And Madam Assistant Mayor, let's start with you.
Yeah, so in Portsmouth right now, one of our major issues is the hotel occupancy bill, and really pushing for that to allow, additional funds for towns like Portsmouth that really rely on tourism as an economic booster. But also, the devil side of that is that it really takes a toll on property tax. And so, for us, we're really focused on allowing Granite Staters to be able to stay in their homes and finding additional sources of revenue for that.
Housing, always important there. Ryan Terrell, how about you from the State Board of Education? What's your perspective?
Yeah, so at the State Board, obviously we deal a lot with education and public education. And public education has become a kitchen table area for all Americans right now as we figure out school choice and mask mandates and where children can get best educated. What's happening in Nashua is parents are navigating what it looks like to go back to work, and is schools going to shut down? So really what I'm hearing right now at the State Board of Education level is what options for school choice can parents have access to? Where can students best get educations, and how do we keep schools open and safe for all students to be able to attend and be able to learn? On top of that, I think people are dealing with real common kitchen table issues like how much stuff is costing at the grocery store, supply chain issues, their favorite foods maybe not being as available as they were before. And so as we pay more for the items that we all use on an everyday basis, as we continue to navigate COVID, as we figure out where to educate our children, I think these are all the biggest issues that not only Nashua, but the Granite State at large are really discussing.
Yeah, those economic issues, a good segue there, Ryan, for, I want to talk to you as well about, you're involved in government, you're also both entrepreneurs as well. So we hear so much about this sort of unsettled landscape of the economy doing well, but certain aspects like workforce and the supply chain creating problems. Joanna, what's going on for you with your business?
So supply chain is a huge issue, especially in a business like mine where I own a cafe. We're talking about the rising costs and how do you mitigate that and pass that on to some degree to your customers. It's been really, really hard and a difficult thing to navigate and strategies to develop. Not every business has the giant buy-in power of a Starbucks or a larger chain. When it comes to workforce, I personally have been really blessed that had not had too many issues. But part of that is I believe in paying my staff a livable wage. I believe in guaranteed base salaries, especially in industries like hospitality, where it's fundamentally has not been at its core. And I think we have to look at that at the Granite State, that we're losing workforce numbers and we're losing young workforce numbers. And so how do we guarantee that we still have those people? And I think the discussion on a state level really needs to be continuing in raising our minimum wage.
Ryan, what about you and your business? What's going on there?
So the supply chain issues are certainly a huge factor in our company. We distribute hair care products across several states, about 11 across the nation. And so we see the effects of the supply chain in every piece of our business, whether it be to produce our product, just getting supplies like denatured alcohol or components to make our shampoos and conditioners, or whether it's actually getting those products to customers when they expect to get them. And so I think this supply chain issue, and especially compounded with inflation, is just sort of a time for business leaders and us all to come to the table and offer solutions to our representatives in Congress, at the state level and local level, on how we can help to improve the supply chain. All of this is something that can be managed as long as we come to the table with real solutions to help people get what they're looking for quicker and get it in the hands of Americans.
When it comes to the issue of racial justice, give us a sense of, what is the state of the state? We know the goal is improvement, and you both embody a lot of progress just in what you've been able to accomplish in the last year alone, but we know that doesn't always mean things are great. So, Joanna, what do you think?
So it's always a moving puzzle, right? We're always trying to move things forward. My concern right now is some of the bills that are on the floor in the legislation seem to actually be backslide in that. some of this legislation is being pushed that it's more unifying and it wants to, and we want to kind of remove the idea that there is a need for racial justice. But we know that that's not fundamentally true, that some people, based on their race, have different avenues in life, and that there's different versions of America for everyone. And so while I'm excited with some of the movement, I still feel like there are some things that can be done on a state level that have kind of been at a standstill. We had the governor form committees that placed recommendations, and we're seeing slow rollouts. I think we see a little bit of that with the Lori's List, but that isn't just racially based. That's, as all Granite Staters, we should be holding authority and holding police figures to higher standards.
Ryan, what about you? What are your thoughts on the state of racial justice in New Hampshire?
When I think about racial justice in New Hampshire, I think more towards what you opened up the question, which is the progress seen in positions like me and Joanna. I think about the various elected officials and sheriffs and people of color that are starting to come up and contribute to the state. And so for me, I am unapologetically an optimist when it comes to race in America, because I look at the long progress that we've made over time. I look at my own life as an example, where I've come on here and written about it several times, that I've never been the direct recipient of anything to be racist or discriminatory in my life. And I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, and have moved to New Hampshire. And so I think that some groups will always point towards what can continue to be progress in the area of racial justice. I don't discount that we have a history of racism in our country. I don't discount that certain individuals, even still today, hold racist views and beliefs. However, I like to look at the whole. I like to look at the progress that we've made in the country, and it's certainly in the Granite State. I like to look at the efforts of our governor in racial progress, even before the racial justice movement really became resurgent in 2020. And so I'm filled with continued optimism for the progress that we've made, and I'm so excited for just the progress that we're making overall in the Granite State and in the country.
Joanna, go ahead, jump in there. Yeah.
Brian, I would completely agree with you, but I think that, as an elected official who was the first person of color to be elected in that position, there are many people who have come and I've received more attacks. Luckily not from my own community in Portsmouth, but from around the state of articles, that were excited that we finally had a minority leader in this position in the state. And the number of people who attacked me based on just my race, it was disturbing, the actual number. So while there is progress, I think we can always say that with that progress does come the burden to be the first of those people to lead these positions.
Ryan, what do you think about that?
I think that every individual is going to have their own life experiences, and I condemn anybody that's reaching out to Joanna or anybody across the state for their race or any other immutable characteristic, and I don't think that that's good for anybody to do. At the same time, as another person of color who has been in a position and been very public in the position that I have not received that type of backlash. In fact, the backlash that I've received has been from people of color across the state in opposition to some of the contrarian views that are held by other people of color. So I think that the more that we can get nuanced into individual action versus collective action, the more that we can look past the race of individuals and look at their merit, I think we'll just move towards a more progressive and better society for all people.
And that plays directly into my next question, which is about this teacher loyalty bill that's being, been debated up there in Concord, which has an aspect of it that says that you can't teach that this country was founded on racism. What do you think about that, Joanna?
So I feel like we have to have global discussions about this too, that it's not just an American problem, racism. But I do believe that we need to make sure that we educate these students who are then going to become active, hopefully active citizens on global aspects. And while I don't necessarily think that America was founded directly on racism, to say that there aren't pinpoints in our founding fathers, in our history, and the fundamentals of our country that are racist, I think it's silly. And I think we have to look at allowing our educators who are experts in these fields to lead these types of legislation.
Ryan, what about you? I know, we kind of caused a bit of a social media firestorm on this when we were first reporting on it back in December. So what are your thoughts now?
America wasn't founded on racism. America certainly utilized a racist structure in the slave trade to build America, but America was founded on the ideas of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and religious freedom. And so I always rest on what America was actually founded on. However, I do acknowledge that the means that we grew has directly benefited from racist ideologies like slavery. And I also know that our history has spread with racist ideologies. Specifically about the teacher loyalty legislation, I think that the progress we made with the freedom from discrimination in education and public workplaces passed in HB2 that removes any teacher to be able to teach that any group of people are inferior or superior than another group of people for any immutable characteristic. That's enough in our state. That sets the standard for all education that can build off of. It removes any disposition for educators to convey the facts of our some of the racist underpinnings of our history without then asserting that those racist underpinnings are still believed today. That's the most important piece of any racial progress that I always look towards. Are we educating students on the history? Are we giving them the context of individuals and as a nation? But then we also making sure that we then back it up by saying, no one at any mass societal level still believes this. All people are created equal, and how we can move forward to build on that legacy.
All right, I always wish we could do this for more time, but we've hit the limit here for today. It's such a pleasure always talking with you. Joanna Kelly, Assistant Mayor of Portsmouth, and Ryan Terrell from the State Board of Education. We appreciate your time on Close Up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, be well.